Charles Oliveira has become one of the most admired fighters in the UFC. Starting on June 9th, 2018, he would embark on one of the greatest win streaks in UFC lightweight history, accumulating wins over tough challengers outside the rankings, old rivals from his past, and even the top of the heap of the UFC lightweight division. What made this win streak even more impressive wasn't that it was a very long one, but it was the way in which Charles Oliveira was fighting. In his fights, Charles Oliveira was always looking for the finish on his opponent, whether that be through a ruthless TKO or a nasty submission. This reckless style and win streak led up to a shot at the UFC lightweight title against former Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler. And after beating him, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje in very exciting fashion, he unfortunately ran into the likes of Islam Makhachev, whom he would lose to in a title fight for the UFC lightweight belt. And right when the hype of Charles Oliveira started to tone down a little bit, he proved that he still belonged at the top of the division by defeating Beneil Dariush in under one round and setting him up for another eventual title fight against the winner of Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski, whenever that happens. But it wasn't always like this with Charles Oliveira. Before his 11-fight win streak, he was considered as kind of a journeyman in the UFC. During his stint in the featherweight division, whenever he would go on a little win streak, he would then go on to lose a fight by devastating fashion. And all of that continued until 2018 when that something finally clicked, and he would go on his 11-fight win streak. In this video, we're going to go over the statistics of Charles Oliveira's UFC career, with an emphasis on his striking, and find out what made Charles Oliveira become such a fan favorite. So let's start this off with the strike accuracy per target of Charles Oliveira's UFC career. You can see that in his 32 fights in the UFC, yes, 32 fights in the UFC, that Charles Oliveira's strike accuracy is actually nothing special. His strike accuracy to the head stands at around 45%, to the body at 69%, and to the leg at 80%. The number that's most surprising here is actually that he's attempted less than 1,000 strikes to the head in his 32-fight UFC career. If you remember the last video where we discussed Israel Adesanya, Izzy actually attempted almost 600 more strikes to the head in his UFC career than Charles, despite him having half the amount of fights. His strike distribution pie chart for his overall UFC career yields something a bit more interesting. You can see that in his career in the UFC, that his main objective when it comes to striking is to attack to the head. And he usually does this with a variety of strikes, whether that be his hooks, crosses, uppercuts, you get the point. And then attempting to finish or actually finish his opponent by KO or submission. If we look over to the UFC website and look at some of the more detailed overall stats, you'll notice that Charles' significant strikes landed per minute is sitting at around 3.54. But wait, hold on a second. If we go back to the last video and see Israel Adesanya's same stat, Charles Oliveira's significant strikes landed per minute is actually less than Izzy's. So why is it in recent memory that some fans regard Israel Adesanya as a boring fighter and Charles Oliveira as a very exciting one? To find our answer, we have to split up Charles Oliveira's career in two, before his 11-fight win streak and during his 11-fight win streak. Let's start by going over Charles Oliveira's strike distribution and strike accuracy before his win streak. Before Charles' win streak, his strike accuracy looked something like this. You'll notice it's actually pretty similar to his overall significant strike accuracy, with just a minor disparity between the accuracy of his head strikes. If you look over to the strike distribution before his win streak, you can see his main objective was to always strike to the head, and did so at a rate of 53% of the time. This number is a little bit lower than his overall strike rate to the head of 58%. Before going to significant strike distribution during his win streak, I would like to preface that these next charts that I'm about to show are going to include Charles' fights against Islam Makhachev and Beneil Dariush. So these next charts are technically all fights after the Paul Felder loss, but they will be labeled as during the win streak. With that said, going over to his strike accuracy during his win streak, we see something a little different. We actually see that there isn't any significant changes with Charles Oliveira's strike accuracy to the leg and body. However, we do see a big change in his strike accuracy to the head. If you compare the strike accuracy to the head during his win streak to the strike accuracy to the head before his win streak, you can actually see there's around a 14% jump in accuracy. So I guess you can say a big contributing factor to Charles' exciting fighting style is due to him landing a lot more accurately to the head with all his strikes in the later half of his career. But all of this data that I showed doesn't actually tell the full story of how Charles Oliveira became such an exciting fighter during his win streak. To find that out, we have to analyze the significant strikes landed throughout each of his 32 fights in the UFC. To do this, we'll use a line chart to visualize the significant strikes landed in each fight of Charles Oliveira's UFC career. Unfortunately, what we see isn't actually too helpful. You'll notice that Charles' significant strikes landed per fight vary widely, and a lot of this is due to how he's always aiming for the finish early in his fights. So, end of video, right? I can't prove why Charles Oliveira is statistically exciting. Well, not exactly. What this chart graphs is the significant strikes landed per fight, and not the significant strikes landed per minute per fight. If we were to graph that instead on the line chart, we actually see a little bit more of a trend, but I think the trend is way more obvious if we graph the significant head strikes landed per minute for each fight. And for purposes of better visualization, I'll remove the second Jim Miller fight, where Charles submitted him in the second minute of the first round. I'll also omit his loss to Islam Makhachev. To analyze this chart even further, I'll bring something a bit more sciencey. In science and engineering, when dealing with these types of charts, there's this thing called the line of best fit. The line of best fit is just a straight line that minimizes the space between the line and the data points. This is used to try to visualize a trend better. If we were to draw a line of best fit for Charles Oliveira's first part of his career, up to and including his fight with Paul Felder, it looks something like this. And we actually see that his significant head strikes landed per minute was actually trending downwards up until that point. Even though Charles Oliveira was still a somewhat decent striker back then, he wasn't showing too much output and it was trending in an even worse direction with each fight. But if we were to draw another line of best fit in Charles Oliveira's later half of his career after his loss to Paul Felder, we actually see that his output frequency to the head has been trending greater and greater with each fight. It's actually even more surprising when you consider that his head strikes landed per minute was getting bigger while the competition he was facing was also getting better. Now let's go back to this inflection point right here. Why, after this loss to Paul Felder, did Charles Oliveira go on this crazy win streak that saw his strike output and strike accuracy get better, even as his competition got better? Well, there's two reasons that I could find. The first is that this loss almost coincides with the birth of Charles' daughter back in 2017. This is the reason that Charles himself is given as the main catalyst for his win streak and what I remember listening to on Joe Rogan. But the second, more important reason was the change in MMA gyms. In 2018, Charles joined the Shootbox Diego Lima Academy, which has a heavy emphasis on their aggressive Muay Thai fighting style. And you can definitely see this in Oliveira's recent fights, like his fight with Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and Beneil Dariush. I couldn't find whether the birth of his daughter contributed to Charles Oliveira's change in MMA gyms, but if Charles himself said that the birth of his daughter was the main driving factor of his win streak, we can probably assume that that's also the reason he changed gyms. Charles Oliveira, despite his rough start in the UFC, has shown an incredible ability to adapt and become the very admired fighter we know this day. And although I can't say for certain that he'll win his next fight against Islam or Volk or whoever that is, what I can say is that it's been very fun watching Charles Oliveira's fighting evolution. I look forward to not only seeing him do well in the future, but to one day capture the UFC lightweight title again. Any additional data, including the sunburst chart with the opponents defeated used in the thumbnail, will be available on the Instagram page. If you like the content, consider subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment down below for discussion or video suggestions. And a quick reminder to be respectful in the comment section. Once again, I'm really grateful to all of you for your continuous support. We passed 1,000 subscribers a few days ago, and I've been over the moon about it. But I couldn't have done it without you all liking the content. I'll continue putting forth my best efforts in the next videos to come. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.